So people should tell me if my mic is a little quiet, and also feel free to type questions into the chat which you would like to talk about. And we'll begin with homage to the Triple Gem. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasāmi. So good to be with you all this evening. It's nice to be returning to these traditional Q&As, which we do sometimes and used to do more often, as a chance to just connect with people, even through this camera, which is granted a bit impersonal, but it's still quite meaningful to be able to speak with people from across the world. So type in your questions to the chat and we can speak to them. And feel free to type your name and where you're tuning in from. Okay, we have an Ajahn Kovilo tuning in. Hey Ajahn, he'll be joining us for Zoom. He's traveling currently, so couldn't do a full restream. Could you speak to the specifics of how you yourself cultivate compassion, remembering others who are suffering? Thank you, Ajahn. With karuṇā, compassion, which is how the mettā-infused heart responds to suffering and meets it. And I've said this before, but I find that I really have to first, Ajahn Nisabho says this mettā practice requires us to be quick on our feet and agile, because so often the temptation is to spread it outwards when very often we're the first people who need it, and more often are. And this impulse to spread loving kindness, say, towards someone we're angry at, rather than understanding the pain of being angry ourselves and how much that hurts, and first addressing that, it's astounding how often I forget. And just that transmutation of anger or frustration, or just that gentle bruising of the day of maybe not feeling quite good enough, or things are just gray, how often I can overlook that, and how, if I am overlooking that subtle note of dukkha in myself, which I could meet with compassion, then often I'm unable to really be with any others it's much harder to truly feel compassion for others authentically. So I'd say for myself, one of my first tasks often is just, stopping and noticing that in myself, any sense of bruising. And if I'm doing that, and keeping my sila pure, and holding, walking in line with Dhamma, and keeping a degree of clarity, I find compassion arises very naturally in regards to other suffering. And I think that's worth noting is in that the Karaniya Metta Sutta, the Buddha's words on loving kindness, the first, I think, 15 lines, or the first lines are 15 qualities preceding cultivating loving kindness. One should be unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. It's almost like the Buddha's acknowledging in this sutta that if you unkink the pipes correctly, then loving kindness naturally will flow. So he gets to it, but so much of the first 15 qualities in that discourse, the most maybe famous of all the Buddhist discourses to the wider population of Buddhists, is about unkinking the pipes. So for me, I find that's really true. If I'm keeping my pipes unkinked, compassion comes naturally. And I'd say the other skillful means I find is art. Uh, I think art, communion with the world in a really beautiful sense, can be used well in the service of the first and the third noble truth. So beautiful art, I find, can metabolize suffering. Um, it lets you take your own or another's pain and reframe the story around it and somehow transmute what can be a story of craving and disappointment and loss into, you can draw out the pith or the lesson from it. And when you boil that down based on the Four Noble Truths, maybe it's just something like letting go of craving. But there's a real way that writing for me can touch, because writing's my form of art, and it's allowable as a monk, which helps. Art allows you to touch suffering, and it can transmute it into something sacred and much deeper. Not to romanticize suffering, that's not something we want to do. But just the inherent difficulty of life, somehow it allows one to, I think, hold it in a different space, and the craving for it to change goes away. And therefore, this dukkha of the Four Noble Truths, the dukkha, the suffering of craving, fades. And yes, you're still left with the entropy of life, the difficulty, but somehow it's held in a wholly different place, wholly used in both senses. And then, of course, art in the service of the third noble truth of calling out beauty and a spiritual beauty. I think that's another use of art that's done very well. And I think this is important. Emerson talked about three transcendentals: truth, goodness, and beauty. And in Theravada Buddhism, we have so much truth and so much goodness. And I think in the West, in Western versions of this dispensation, as the culture, Buddhist culture, grows to maturity in the West, we have a lot of room to cultivate beauty. These are technologies of the heart that are ancient, hallowed, and we should lean into a little bit. Beauty the right kind of beauty is mudita, and it can be compassion too, and it invokes those things in the heart. So thank you, Ajahn. And sometimes good conversation with you helps a lot. Mariah asks, Bante, could wanting to get rid of my smartphone for good and limited internet use to a few times per week for Dhamma activities be too extreme for a layperson? I struggle with entertainment addiction. I understand. Could getting rid of my smartphone for good permanently and limiting internet use to a few times per week for Dharma activities? I'd say it might be possible. I think you're going to have to judge this. A blanket statement, depending on your career and your family situation, is probably not possible. And I think if you have a sort of dumb phone and your laptop, you probably could make it work. Another option would be having you might need a smartphone for, boarding passes these days, although you can print them out still. But there's a lot of things that rely on those apps these days. But maybe you just have one that is only used for that, and you keep it home, for example. I think you singling out internet use and addiction as a key issue in life is really wise. I've referenced this sutta often, the simile of the quail, Majjhima Nikaya 66. And in it, the Buddha says, though when the Tathagata, the teacher, tells one to give up something, even a trifling thing, and one responds thinking, what a stickler. That's obviously a kind of playful translation. The Buddha tells us to give up even this small thing and does not give it up. That small thing can bind them like a great fetter, like a rotting creeper would bind the leg of a quail. Whereas when the teacher, and they show disrespect to the teacher. Whereas when the teacher says, give something up, and the student says, agrees and says, okay, I will give this up. then even that fetter does not bind them like a bull elephant would snap a leather strap. And what I think is so significant in that image is the things that the world considers very normal and might not look debilitating. For example, staring, checking the phone over and over, or, the world's culture is not a great guide. As practitioners, you start to feel the rotting creeper. It feels sticky. And you begin to feel like this is something that's genuinely holding me back, and I'm sick of it. And I think at those points, you can't sort of just run in circles around the rotting creeper or stretch it a little bit. You just sometimes really do have to snap it and find a skillful means to an upāya, as we call it, uh, to help. And I think, how it's an addiction is if it really feels like it's holding back your Dharma practice. And if you think about it a lot, I reference this quote often of the sign of virtue is singleness of mind. The nimitta of sila is samadhi. And what that means for me is if there's something in your life that you just chew on again and again and over, they talk about food noise or booze noise. It might be, phone noise, the thing that's kind of the static that's always calling you. That is in itself, and you wonder, do I need to do anything about this? That question circling again and again is in itself the answer. In Majjhima Nikāya 117, the Buddha says that the Noble Eightfold Path is requisites for the eighth factor of right concentration. So if the first seven factors in some sense can be thought of as in the service of the final factor of singleness of mind, unity of heart, then if there's something you're doing that's not letting the mind settle in because you're just doubting about it and thinking about it, then your answer's right there. You do need to do something about it, and it's just time to give it up. So yeah, I'd say something about the phone probably needs to be done. They also have e-ink phones now. But thank you for singling that out and finding a friend who can help. Ajahn Kovilo and I, as monastics, we have to confess with each other every 2 weeks. And we'll confess official Vinaya offenses, but we'll also just confess the things we wish we'd done better. And maybe, you need a little bit of a kind of skillful means there too, where if you do look at the phone when you're not supposed to, I know of someone who had determined to stop smoking, and they wrote a check to their least favorite politician and gave it to a friend and said, if I do this, thing, then you got to mail that check. Don't know if I'd advise that exactly, but you get the point. So you can give it a try, or at least something similar, and find a buddy who's willing to do it as well. Hey, Jessica. What is the meaning or significance of the white and black clothing that an upāsaka wears? So for those who received our newsletter or were at the gathering 2 weeks ago, Ajahn Kovilo introduced the form of the upāsaka to the community. This literally means one who sits near. It comes from, I think, the word sid, which the root, which means to sit, and upa, which means to approach almost, so like sitting near. And it was the term that the Buddha used for his lay followers, Buddhists. And actually, the base definition of it is just someone who's taken refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. The current daily sutta, if you haven't subscribed to this newsletter, it's a sutta a day. Just look up Reading Faithfully Daily Sutta. And the sutta for today was the Buddha speaking to his, I think, cousin, Mahanama, who in the commentarial accounts took over the princedom and I think was at least a stream enterer as well. But he asks the Buddha, what is an upāsaka? And the Buddha says, An upāsakā is someone who has taken refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. So gained and expressed a significant measure of faith, confidence, saddha, which is the Pali that literally means to place the heart, in the Buddha as the teacher, the Dhamma as his dispensation, and the Sangha as the noble beings. Although we can resonate those words out to, and they often are, to kind of encompass concepts such as awakening, the Dhamma being the truth, and the Sangha being kind of what happens when that awakened mind knows truth in a human being. It expresses in action virtue. And then Mahanama asks, and then the Buddha says, a virtuous upāsaka is one who keeps the 5 precepts. And then he goes on to speak about all these other qualities. So the baseline is just this measure of faith. And it's not the faith of that you come across in many of other religions, where there's a binary of faith at the basis. Either you accept some Jesus as your savior, or you don't, or some other thing. The Buddhist measure of faith, saddha, confidence, actually is a decent translation in some contexts, is taking on these teachings as a working hypothesis. And the Buddha very explicitly says in the Chanki Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 95, he's challenged about this point. And how do we know? And he says, look, one protects truth by saying, if one has faith in something, saying, I have faith in this, but one does not yet come to the conclusion and state definitively, only this is true, everything else is false. Or if one has arrived at a position through logical conjecture, one says, I have arrived at this through logical conjecture, but one does not yet decide, only this is true and everything else is false. So it's an epistemological humility where the Buddha is saying, like, you can say you have faith, but we've all been wrong before, but it's enough to work with. And because the Buddhist path is a path of praxis, I mean, you look through the Tripitaka, the compilation of the Buddha's 50 years of teaching, 50 plus, and it's very few random stories. It's maybe almost none. It's how do you train your mind? Which means you really can test these teachings. You don't have to take them on a huge amount of faith. But the Buddha says, then Chanki asks, or Bharadvaja, who's the interlocutor in this sutta, asks, how does one discover truth? And he says, the Buddha says, one approaches a teacher, listens, practices, etc. And then arrival at truth is if one arrives at nibbana at the end. So one can test these out. Okay, the question was actually about the white clothing. So this was just an ancient form the Buddha, I think he recommended for his followers, or that his followers or people in the Buddhist time would often take on, where they would wear white. And I think it's a symbol of, or a kind of motion towards a purity of intention. In Thailand and in Sri Lanka, people will just wear white shirts. You can wear white pants or skirt as well, but they're very hard to find. So usually we just recommend some sort of black toned bottom. But a white top or a white scarf or something, it's just a symbol of like coming to a place with a certain amount of care and respect. And, we raised this 2 weekends ago. And I think I didn't phrase it well. I think because of people's histories with religion, this stuff can land in a sense of hierarchy and mandate and in and out. It's not supposed to be that. It's an ancient form that people can take if they want. There's no pressure. But it's just entering a special space and remembering that through wearing white. And it makes you be really careful with eating, because spilling on white's really hard to get out. But as someone who wears an outfit every single day, these small motions externally can affect internal inclination over time. That is the symbol. It's ancient. So we wanted to give it to people as an option. It's something done in Thailand, Sri Lanka, and elsewhere. Good to see everyone. Connie. So we have Dave. Dear Ajahn, in the Metta Nisansa Sutta, we hear of 11 advantages of increasing metta cultivation. Number 7, so these are the benefits of loving kindness. Number 7 is fire, poison, and sword cannot touch someone developing loving kindness. Will you speak on what's meant by this? The other 10 seem natural. Is this the only one that is symbolic? If so, why obscure the worldly meaning? Or was it also meant literally? Thank you. Thank you, Dave. So the benefits of loving kindness, let me see if I can get them. 1, sleep. So these are the benefits of cultivating loving kindness. 1, sleeps easily, wakes easily, dreams no evil dreams. 1 is dear to human beings and non-human beings. The Devas protect one. Neither fire, poison, or arrows can touch one. 1 has a clear complexion. 1 dies unconfused. And if 1 does not attain awakening, or if 1 does not go to the Brahma abodes, goes at least to heaven. I'm unsure about that last one. And I'm also unsure if that's 2 or if that's the dying unconfused one is 1 and the fire, arrows, and poison are 3. We get to 11 one way or the other. And by the way, this is sleep advice from the Buddha, is cultivate loving kindness. So the part about fire, arrows, or poison not touching one, I've also wondered about that, Dave, and I've heard it equated with the 3 roots, mula, of unwholesomeness, the kilesa as they're known in Thai Buddhism. So greed, hatred, delusion. And I've always tried to figure out which one was which, actually. And to be honest, I still can't. And I'm unconvinced by that explanation because I have a hard time mapping that on. If someone has a good explanation, feel free to type it into the chat and hopefully I'll get there by the end. But I've taken it actually as just a little bit, maybe a little bit literal. So for those who are, not completely on board with the idea that there are unseen forces, that's totally fine. But I've seen, the Buddha speaks about the Devas protecting one. And a lot of people in our lives, I think, have stories of just something speaking or indicating one. I know my mother has talked about one instance where she was on a bike heading towards an intersection full tilt, and something told her to slow down really fast. And she did. And then a semi just came blasting through the intersection. And I think a lot of people have stories like that of things just kind of happening. I remember this was an interesting story and a good warning. I was a new monk and I determined to only eat 1 meal a day. And I was at a monastery at that time where there was a bunch of new monks from Bangkok, temporary ordinations, who would work and they had a little bit of snacks before noon. We usually eat 1 meal a day, but this is sort of a second meal. And I broke my adhitthana. I had a few snacks, and my determination, I broke it. And on one level, you might just say, it's just a cookie and like a few snack bars. But I'd made a determination, and it really felt like it really did not feel good. And then a monk called me up to work on the roof, and I was walking, and I broke through the roof, and I landed on the edge of a railing. And if I'd fallen to the right, I would have fallen another 3 stories onto cement. I probably would have died or broken my legs and pelvis or something. But I fell left instead. And not only was it an indicator for me of like, I think when you break your sila, you open yourself up to Mara, to other forces. And I think we've all felt that if you compromise your virtue, you are vulnerable. In some sense, your heart has bought into the conditioned realm and it is therefore vulnerable. You've stopped aligning with Dhamma, which is a much more solid foundation and safe. Ajahn Chah would often say, protect your precepts and your precepts will protect you. Or I saw another instance of at Wat Mapjan, where I ordained, one of the workers was up at the chetty, and his son got on his motorcycle. He's a sort of wild 12-year-old and just started going down this gigantic hill. But he didn't realize that the brakes on the motorcycle don't work if it's not on. And I watched him blaze past at maybe 40 miles an hour, unable to stop. And there was another, 400 feet of he would have died. I don't know how he would have gotten off, but he fell off right after I saw him. And somehow his body went straight into a storm drain that was this big. And he just stopped. He didn't hit the edge of it. He just gently went right in, and he was a little bruised, but nothing else. And yeah, it could be coincidence, but it was pretty wild. And the final story I'll give is I was on Tudong in the jungle. So this is where monastics go camping, basically, but with our little glots, which are these umbrella tents. And we were in a park named Khao Yai, which is the first national park established in Thailand. A lot of forest masters have gone there. And Ajahn Anon spent a long time, Longpo Anon, my ordaining Ajahn. And so a few monks and I had gone in, and there's these corridors of broken bamboo you'll see around it, where the elephants, they'll go in these big circles that take months, eating the bamboo on left and right, and they'll just circle back around each time. And by the time they get back around, their bamboo is regrown. So there's these sort of corridors, and you don't get in a corridor because a elephant will probably come through there. And I'd camped near, I didn't know it was a corridor. And my other monk companion, Ajahn Stuart, if you've listened to Longpo Anon's Dharma talks, you probably have heard him translating, a really good, wonderful monk. He was about 15 feet away from me in his glot. And Ajahn Anon had explicitly told me, don't go back to your glot before 10 p.m. Like, just keep walking meditation. But I'd gone back and I was meditating in my glot. And I heard this, trees breaking in the distance and this fast approach. And elephants, they don't need to see. They can feel, you might have heard this, they can talk to each other through the vibrations in their feet over thousands, hundreds of miles. They can hear, feel snakes in the ground just through their feet. Like, they can just navigate without sight. And so they're fine at night in pitch black. And so I heard this crashing through the forest coming towards me. And I just didn't know what to do. It was probably the most scared I've ever been. And it was just coming closer and closer. And it went over to Tensudiko's glot. And Tensudiko had taken Longpo Anon's advice, and he was walking meditation elsewhere. He was being a good monk. And the elephant started playing around with the tarp, which was over the glot. And it was 15 feet away. And I thought, my glot's next, and it's gigantic. And so I just went down on my knees and started to put my hands on Anjali and just say, Buddhang Saranam Gacchami, Dhammang Saranam Gacchami, Sanghang Saranam Gacchami. And just invoke the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. And I did it a few times in the pitch dark with the elephant nearby, and suddenly the largest wave of calm I think I've ever felt just came over me. And my mind just went completely kind of still, and the elephant stopped and it wandered away. And the next morning, I talked to Longpo Anon about that and asked if he'd helped me. And I won't say exactly what he said, but what I will say is the next day I moved my glot, but another monk, a senior Ajahn who I have a lot of faith in, deep concentration, moved to my spot. And he had a nimitta, a vision, immediately when he moved there, of an elephant coming to him at night and stamping his face and killing him. And he came, and I was with him when he was telling Longpo Anon of this vision. And the park ranger was next to us. And in his vision, the elephant that had killed him was a one-tusked elephant. And as he was telling Longpo Anon this, the park ranger was like, actually, a one-tusked elephant just entered the area like today, and it's known kind of to be a bit of a rogue. And Ajahn Nisabho said, "Oh yeah, this is a warning. You need to move your glot." So he did. And that evening, an elephant came through. I don't know if it was one-tusked or not, but I was very glad I lived with people with superpowers. And so all to say, yeah, if the Devas are protecting you, who knows exactly how far that goes. But if you haven't read Peace Pilgrim, I would. It's a free online PDF of this amazing woman who walked across the US with nothing, I think like 5 times, with nothing but her sweater, which said Peace Pilgrim, and a toothbrush, and like the letters that people mailed her. And her samadhi, I think, was amazing. And she would just walk until she was offered food and until she found a place to sleep. I think she went days without eating sometimes and would sleep on the cement. And she has a lot of stories of angels helping her. So take it as coincidence. Maybe, things just sense when you have that loving kindness, but I think there's also maybe more going on, and it couldn't hurt. I've never been shot at with arrows or fire or poison, so unsure about those exact ones. But elephants, it's a good bet. Hello, everyone. Hello, Colorado. Thanks, Ajahn. Jay said, I think this answers my question from Saturday about a young child's first experience with death. Let's honor it and the spirits among us. Sadhu. Sadhu. Okay, we have a little longer. I don't usually get to tell that elephant story. It's a pretty precious one to me, actually. Bhante, are the Pali concepts of viveka and nekama analogous? Both ideas seem to lead a practitioner to renounce the trappings of contemporary materialism. Huhu, Sukhi Hontu. So viveka, for those who don't know, means seclusion, and nekama means renunciation. So do the concepts of seclusion and renunciation, are they analogous? Both seems to lead a practitioner towards renouncing the trappings of contemporary materialism. Yes. Yes, I think they are very similar. Seclusion is often spoke about. There's 2 kinds, or 3 kinds. There's kaya viveka, seclusion of the body. So making sure you get enough time in your day where you get time alone. And in your week, do you have one day a week where you're an afternoon where you really take some extra time to be by yourself? And in your year, do you have 3 times a year where you go on retreat or to a monastery? Then there's chitta viveka, which is seclusion of mind from unwholesome states. This is a prerequisite for the first jhana. But there's a measure of it we can all touch by being mindful. And the more you walk in line with Dhamma, the more mindful you are, the less you can be, the less you're affected by worldly impacts, even when you're amongst the world. And I find that can be strengthened a great deal by, not ironically, but perhaps counterintuitively, by loving kindness. In some sense, loving kindness, it seems like you're reaching out to the world with it. So how could it lead to more chitta viveka, seclusion of heart, in the sense of being unshaken? But what I find is the Brahma Viharas, it's almost like the problem with entanglement, which is the opposite of viveka, is a sense of you're absorbing another's note and flavor. It's affecting you, their resonance. And it's not always a good resonance. So to shield from that, you can either, for example, cultivate a very powerful breath practice where you can almost imagine the breath circulating and creating almost a magnetic field. But if you have loving kindness and you interact with people and you radiate, that's how the Buddha speaks about loving kindness. It's only in the commentaries do you get this thing of invoking individual and people. In the suttas, the Buddha talks about radiating loving kindness in all directions. And if you radiate out, there's less chance for impact to make its way in. And you can interact with quite fraught, difficult situations and come out without much residue. I find this is the real power of Brahma Viharas. It's very robust. And ironically, it can allow a certain seclusion of mind, chitta viveka, even in the midst of everything. And then there's upādi viveka, which is seclusion from the substrates, the acquisitions. And this is considered basically awakening. It's you've let go, you've achieved some freedom of heart from those things, from the acquisitions which tie the rest of us down. And renunciation is, the giving up of what things aren't needed anymore. But what I'd say here, perhaps, is yes, these can be really helpful tools stepping back from materialism, but there is what I've seen happen is sometimes people come into the contact with these teachings and there's something very attractive about renunciation and cutting off. And it's good to play with that, but it can lead to a certain violence and deadening of heart and dryness because you're cutting off the means of happiness and pleasure you've had before. And, you do have to be patient as more refined means of pleasure and happiness replace them, internal ones, wholesome ones, giving, community, spiritual friendship. I would put forms of mudita and art in there. But also you have to be very intentional about replacing the type of nourishment you're losing. So for every Netflix subscription you cancel, can you establish one night a week or one morning a week where you invite people over for brunch and feed them? Like very explicit, replacing junk food with wholesome food. And so when we talk about viveka and renunciation, I think pairing them with words like sanctity, contentment, mudita, rejoicing, kalyana mitta, spiritual friendship, these are the warming, the nourishment of the heart, which allows for letting go, nekama, of what is no longer necessary or healthy. But you need to give your heart something else. And that's why those metrics are so useful. I've seen it really is a common pitfall as people find this path and they want so badly to align their lives with it. And if it's not working, they'll just double down on cutting out things. And they don't realize often what they need is just a more holistic path. They need more community. They need to go to monasteries. They need a little more ritual. They need some art. They need to give. Go to a food bank. Invite people over for a meal. Things like that. So yes, viveka and nekama are important, seclusion and renunciation, but pair them with contentment, with rejoicing, with joy, with friendship, community. What is it that makes seeing the suffering we create for ourselves uncomfortable? Is this ego? Sometimes the discomfort is overwhelming, and I find myself trying not to think about it or address it. So I think this is Moria pointing to what I was saying at first, which is that true karuṇā, loving kindness practice requires a certain agility in that we have to repeatedly, so often realize that the proper object for our care is ourselves, and we often overlook that. And I'm not completely sure why it's so hard to look at our own suffering, but I think because it's hard. It's hard to suffer, and there's bruising and disappointment there. I mean, in a sense, we spend our whole lives running from suffering. There's a commentarial piece of wisdom that says movement obscures dukkha. Continuity, so movement obscures suffering. Continuity obscures anatta, not self, or no, anicca, impermanence. And I forgot what obscures not self, but movement obscures dukkha. if you try not to move, lie down and try not to move for a time, and you'll start to feel pain. And when we take enough pleasure of a certain kind in, it becomes dole, which is painful, and so we switch to another kind. That our whole lives often are predicated on switching inputs to keep a pleasurable movement going, and that's to run from some baseline discontent. So in a sense, I guess it's not confusing at all why it's hard to look at our own suffering, because in a sense, you could almost say that's what most of samsara is about. It is our running from suffering. And avidya, ignorance, the base cause of samsara, of suffering, of the first link in the 12 of dependent origination. Avidya is ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. That is the definition, as an applied skill. So the Four Noble Truths: to see suffering, to comprehend it, to understand and let go of the cause, craving, tanha, unwholesome craving, tanha, to realize nibbana, peace, cessation, enlightenment, and to practice to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. And in a sense, the ignorance of that first one, our inability to really comprehend suffering, is the root of all avidya. It's really hard to look at our own suffering. And you feel this, like when you disappoint someone, when you embarrass yourself, you'll notice the bruise begin to move through the chitta, through the body, the slow washing out of the pain. And you just have to kind of sit there with it. And you'll notice a huge portion of the mind trying to bargain and, okay, if I just make some rash adhitthana right now or apologize 3 times, that'll make it better. I can move the bruise through me. I can rush this along. It doesn't work. And so the negotiating mind, it fails. And all of samsara, in a sense, is our negotiating mind trying to run. So just remember what it's like to be with the bruise through the whole waiting, and how hard that is and uncomfortable, and how much wisdom it takes, and poise and equanimity and care to do that. Patience, grace. That's not easily acquired. So yeah, I think we know, all of us, probably very well, that note of dukkha and how hard it is to actually just be with. All right, Josh, are there any resources and recommendations for attaining stream entry as a layperson? I would say the suttas are good. And the advice is the same. So stream entry, the first level of awakening, was attained by many lay people in the discourses. And I feel fairly confident I know several lay people who are stream enterers. And yet, I find a fixation on that goal and the blinding power of that metric, or the eclipsing power of that label, to be unhealthy in how many hold it. What I mean by that is, because it's very important that should be all of our goal for this lifetime. That's a bit broad. It's a very good goal to attain stream entry in this lifetime. But I like how Ajahn Nisabho talks about right effort, and that if you are swimming, if you're always looking at the island you're swimming towards, your stroke is very awkward. You want to be just focusing on the stroke and the beauty of the motion through the water most of the time. And every now and again, you peek your head out and look at the island you're going towards and make sure you're still going the right direction. So it's good. Remember, yes, we're trying to purify the heart, and that leads to stream entry. And it's important to take that seriously. Like, what would our lives look like if we really oriented towards practice and took these teachings with that much sincerity? And what I find it can so easily lead to is a fixation on a goal-oriented practice, which is not healthy. Because the 10 paramitas, the spiritual perfections, dana, sila, giving, virtue, nekkhamma, renunciation, truthfulness, determination. It's this list of 10 beautiful qualities. It's not in the suttas, not in the early ones, but yet these lists, 10 in the Theravada, 6 in the Mahayana, emerge in every Buddhist culture, I think, because it's so meaningful to have language for the breadth of spirit that develops when you truly practice the Noble Eightfold Path holistically. The Noble Eightfold Path is the input. These 10 paramitas are one part of the output. And what they let you do is they really let you observe the other beautiful qualities in the heart that are growing in a lay life, in a monastic life. And that's really important, because if you don't notice, oh, I'm a lot kinder than I was. I don't, 2 years ago, I wouldn't, I would have gotten this piece of cake and just eaten the bigger one. And now, actually my first thought is to give away the bigger one, or maybe it's not, but maybe I made myself give away the bigger one because I knew that was the right thing to do. Or I got this gift and my first thought is, who can I give it to? 2, 3 years ago, that wouldn't have been my thought. And you have to develop language and seeing that in yourself. That's dana. And to notice that's a huge growth on the path towards purity of heart, towards stream entry. There's a quality, they say a stream enter you cannot achieve stream entry while being ungrateful. That's worth pausing on. That's in the suttas. And just to say, take note of these other things happening in your life. And I know one man who was set on ordaining, and he couldn't. He had a son. His son would have been okay if he'd ordained financially and such, but he realized he had to come back. And he said, from that moment on, I took those first 3 paramitas as almost a mantra. How much can I give, dana? How virtuous can I be, sila? How much can I give up, nekkhamma? And he's more monastic than a lot of monks I know, a lot of monastics I know. So really not being fixated on the goal all the time, take note of that, but then really, use the situation you're in as your path of practice as much as you can. But yes, in terms of explicit practices, I'd say an hour and a half of meditation a day is important. I would say keeping 1 day a week as your upāsakā, where you hold the 8 precepts, is important. I would say trying to feed someone once a day, if you can, or once a week at the least, in terms of maybe inviting someone over, a few people, and giving them food. That's just a really beautiful thing. Going to a monastery, I would say 3 times a year if you can. There's ones nearby most places. Abhayagiri in California, Sravasti Abbey in Washington, hopefully soon Clear Mountain, Temple Monastery in the East Coast, Empty Cloud, Birkin, or on retreat. Read the suttas, and give up some sense, keep the 5 precepts at the very least. These will all lead you in the right direction. Okay. That's a lot of talking. So I'm going to go over to Zoom now, where Ajahn Kovilo can help me talk, because he'll be there too. But I really want to value a community like this. I feel very blessed. And I've quoted this before, but there's a sutta where the Buddha, it's called the 8 inopportune moments. And he says, there are 8 inopportune moments in the world. One is a Tathagata arises in the world, teaches the Dhamma, but one is reborn in a hell realm and does not hear the Dhamma. This is the first inopportune moment, missed opportunity. The Tathagata arises in the world, teaches the Dhamma, but one is reborn in the ghost realm, the animal realm, the long-lived gods. Or one is reborn in an outlying country and does not hear the Dhamma. Or a Tathagata arises in the world, teaches the Dhamma. One is reborn in a land where the Dharma is, but one has wrong view and is not interested in hearing the Dhamma. Or a Tathagata arises in the world, teaches the Dhamma, but one does not have the right faculties to hear the Dhamma. This is another inopportune moment. Or one is reborn in the right place at the right time, or the right place with the right faculties, with right view, but a Tathagata does not arise in the world and does not teach the Dhamma. This is the 8th inopportune moment. Practitioners, there's one opportune moment. One is reborn in the right place, with the right faculties, with right view to hear the Dhamma. And a Tathagata has arisen in the world and has taught the Dhamma. This is the one opportune moment. So welcome to the one opportune moment. And I just think that gratitude is how the Buddha says one can't achieve stream entry without a feeling of gratitude. And we was reading a sutta recently where the Buddha teaches a wanderer, I think Vacchagotta, and he goes off and he achieves enlightenment. And he sees some monks passing him, and he says, "Go to the Buddha and in my name touch your head to his feet and say that I have served him. I worship him." Suchina is the word. And they do that. And the Buddha understands that what Vacchagotta, I think that's him, this monk is saying is that he's achieved enlightenment. And the fact that this monk's way of telling the Buddha that he's achieved awakening is expressing his utter gratitude. I just think that's such a beautiful thing, and that they both understood exactly what it meant. So gratitude. See you all on Zoom soon. I'll put the link in the chat. If you don't see it there, feel free to go to clearmountainmonastery.org, go to the Wednesday evening live stream listing, and the Zoom link will be there. But otherwise, we'll see you soon, and on Zoom in a second, and hopefully in a few days on Saturday for Saturday morning.